time of my life. I never felt this way before.
From building timelines to assigning the right people and even spotting risks across dozens of projects, Monday Sidekick knows your business, thinks ahead, and takes action. One click on the star and consider it done.
And I owe it all to you.
Try Monday Sidekick. AI you'll love to use on Monday.com.
If you're a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility and your machinery isn't working right, Grainger knows you need to understand what's wrong as soon as possible. So when a conveyor motor falters, Grainger offers diagnostic tools like calibration kits and multimeters to help you identify and fix the problem. With Grainger, you can be confident you have everything you need to keep your facility running smoothly. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. If you're new here, my name is Will, and each week I narrate your real life paranormal experiences as well as cover some famous paranormal cases along the way. And before we get into this week's episode, we need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers, who are Steph Lingenfelter, Jill, Sasha Poppy, Sarah Graham, Natalie Baker, Lamari, Nathan Stevenson, Karis O'Neill, Holly Brewer, Matt Marshall, Anna Charles, Jojo, Faye Gibb, Matilda, Roger, Bobby Gee, Jessica O'Neill, Normita Acosta, Dylan J. Orr, Georgina Takani, Richard McDougall, Sophie Wong, Dave Voss, Claire Lemon, Lily, Chloe, Laura, Alice Brown, Leah McKay, Cara Burke, Jay Sergoyne, and Angie Shidraki. Wow, I think that's a record for the show. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon, and if this is something that you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode's show notes, where you can gain access to ad-free main episodes as well as exclusive scary episodes. But now, let's get into our next paranormal case. Some hauntings linger. They stretch across months or years, wearing a family down slowly and leaving a scar long after the activity fades. But there are a rare few that simmer quietly in the background, then suddenly burn bright and terrifying for a short time before dropping back into silence. And it's those cases that feel the strangest, because when everything stops, there is still no real reason anyone can give for why it ever began. In 1960, a man named Gerard Gooden bought what he hoped would be a fresh start. He was known as Jerry. He worked as a maintenance man in a local factory and had grown up in the Catholic Church. At one point, he had thought seriously about becoming a priest, but the reality of the Great Depression and the need to earn a living pulled him into work instead. The house he bought stood at number 966 Lindley Street, a modest bungalow in the northern part of Bridgeport, Connecticut. 4 rooms, a small yard, a front porch where neighbours would nod to each other on their way to work. It was not much, but it was theirs. Jerry lived there with his wife Laura. Laura came from a Native American family and had been a quiet child, more comfortable with adults and close relatives than with groups of other kids. She carried that same caution into adult life. A year after they moved in, they had a son, Jared Jr. Jerry Jr. had cerebral palsy. Caring for him was at times exhausting, but the Goodens poured everything into it. They did not use babysitters. One of them was always home. Any spare money went on medical care and equipment. Friends and neighbours remembered him as a smiling child, often in his parents' arms. In the autumn of 1967, when he was 6, He caught what seemed like a simple cold. It worsened very quickly, and he died of complications from the illness. For the Goodens, whose daily life had revolved entirely around his care, it was shattering. After his death, they visited his grave every day for months and set up a little shrine in the living room with photos and flowers. After some time had passed, their parish priest, Father William Grimes, gently asked them whether they would ever consider adoption. It sounded unthinkable at the time. Their child had only been buried for a short while. Not long after, life closed in even further. Doctors found a tumour and Laura needed a hysterectomy. The operation saved her life, but meant she could never carry another baby. The possibility of a second child vanished in a hospital corridor. For a long time, they lived inside that loss. But people in their neighbourhood loved them. They had seen what kind of parents the Goodens were. When the couple finally returned to Father Grimes and said they would be open to adoption, 25 relatives and neighbours wrote letters to support them. In May 1968, the phone rang. There was a little girl in Canada, 4 years old, from an Indigenous family. Her name was Marcia. Her birth family already had 9 children. There were alleged claims that she had been tied to a chair for long periods because no one could cope with her. The agency suggested that, because of Laura's heritage, this might be a good match. The Goodens did not hesitate. They got in their car and drove to Ontario, a journey that would take them around 18 hours. It was a match, and they took her home to Lindley Street. For the first time in a while, the house was full of the sounds of a child again. They loved her, and they were terrified of losing her. If you put together the death of their son, Laura's own anxious upbringing, and the loss of the possibility of another baby, you can probably guess what happened next. The rules became tight. Marcia could play with other children, but only if they came to the Gooden house. Laura walked her to school and back every day and rarely let her out of sight. She watched the news and imagined every worst case scenario. There were not many children Marcia's age on that street, so most of the time she played alone. Neighbours remembered glancing through the window and seeing her on the living room floor with a Monopoly set, moving both sides herself. She was now in a new country, with a new family, with almost no freedom, and very few friends. And not long after she arrived, strange things began to happen in the house. At first, it was easy to explain away. Small objects that were sure that they had left on one table would turn up somewhere else. Keys, scissors, odd bits of change. Things would vanish and then reappear. They put it down to tiredness, to grief, to being distracted. Everyone misplaces things. Then there was the sofa. About a year after Marcia moved in, the daughter of their close friends, the Hoffmans, came around to play. Her name was Rosemary. She and Marcia were in the living room, sitting together on the couch with their toys. A few minutes later, Rosemary burst into the kitchen, eyes wide, telling the adults that the sofa had lifted off the floor while they were sitting on it. You can imagine the adults sharing that quiet look that says, "Is this a joke, or is she serious?" And when they entered the living room, there sat Marcia, smiling. Rosemary also claimed she noticed that Marcia sometimes talked to her teddy bears as if somebody invisible was in the room with her. One day she asked who she was speaking to. Marcia told her it was her grandfather. She said she could speak to him whenever she wanted, and that he was upset that she had been taken away from her birth family. Now, a child from a traumatic background talking about a grandparent in this way is not unusual by itself. It becomes a little more interesting when you put it alongside what started happening to the house. By the late 1960s and early 70s, the Goodens were hearing something else. Loud, repetitive pounding on the outside walls of the bungalow. It came at night, It sounded like somebody standing outside throwing rocks or swinging a heavy object. Whenever Jerry went out to look, there was no one there. No marks on the siding, no stones on the ground. The sound would start as a slow, steady thud and grow into a rolling barrage that seemed to move along the walls. After a while, Jerry did what most people would do. He rang the police. He did not say the word ghost. He thought he was dealing with a prank or vandalism. Reports from the time mention Lieutenant Cocho, who came out to take a statement. There were also reports that the city checked for loose guttering, for pipes rattling in the walls, for faults in the foundation. They found nothing obvious. This wasn't a one-off happening. It happened over a period of time, which led to these investigations. Then suddenly, the pounding stopped. Then, almost a year later, it started again. One of the neighbours, Officer John Holsworth, came over to listen for himself. He brought recording equipment so that, if nothing else, the city could hear that the sound was real. Still, there was no clear culprit. Kids were suspected, then ruled out. Heavy machinery at a nearby hospital construction site was considered, then discounted. At times, the Goodens said it no longer sounded like blows on the outside of the house. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. While all of this was going on, life outside the house was not kind to Marcia. She struggled at school. She was bullied, apparently for her appearance and for being different. In one incident, a boy attacked her so badly that she ended up in a back brace and had to stay home for a long time. That was enough for the Goodens. They decided she was not going back to that school. They arranged home study while they tried to find other options. So, we have a small house, a child with a troubled background, 2 grieving parents who cannot bear the thought of anything happening to her, noises in the walls, objects being moved, and officials with no answers. All of this bubbling away quietly year after year until one week in November 1974 when everything seemed to suddenly explode. November 1974. In the second half of November that year, the pounding was back. One night Laura heard 3 very clear knocks at the front door. Not in the walls this time, on the door itself. She went to open it. There was no one there. She was just about to chalk it up to the same old wall noises when she looked down and noticed wet footprints on the porch leading up to the threshold. The pavement and streets were dry. It had not been raining. Soon after that, new phenomena started to appear. Interior doors edged open when nobody was near them. Chairs were not quite where they had been left. Jerry saw something that made his stomach drop. As he walked into a room, he glanced at the window and saw a human hand pressed flat against the glass from the inside. Just a hand, no arm, no body. When he looked again, it was gone. On Thursday, the 21st of November, the Goodens had the Holsworth family around for dinner. At some point in the evening, they all heard a bright, sharp sound of breaking glass from the main bedroom. They ran in. The inner pane of the double-glazed window was shattered, shards all over the bed. The outer pane, which faced the street, was still intact. There was no stone on the floor, no obvious impact point. By itself, that is a strange little mystery. As the start of what came next, it feels more like a warning shot. Friday, the 22nd of November. Jerry came home from work, had dinner with Laura and Marcia, and they all moved into the living room. The main bedroom door was closed, the television was on, and Marcia was doing a jigsaw puzzle on the floor. At some point, Jerry turned the volume down. He thought he heard something. He opened the bedroom door. The blind on the broken window had snapped up by itself and coiled at the top. The movement had ripped the curtains from their hooks. They were lying on the floor. Jerry rehung them. As he did, the rod came down. He and Laura did not talk much about it, but there was that look between them, that look that says, "Did you see that too?" Maybe it was a faulty bracket. Maybe. Half an hour later, it happened again, this time in the kitchen. And then the knocking began. Slow, steady taps in the walls, building into a rapid, angry hammering that rolled around the house. Then, as quickly as it started, the whole house went quiet. They went to bed, unsure whether the next sound they would hear would be the alarm clock or the walls. Saturday, the 23rd. They spent most of the day out visiting family and going to Mass. They came home in the late afternoon. Marcia fell asleep in the car, and Jerry carried her to bed. When he walked into her room, he saw that the television, which normally sat on a high shelf, was laying face down on the bed. He put it back. He went into the kitchen to tell Laura what he found, and as he stepped through the door, the kitchen turned into a scene from a poltergeist textbook. Plates and dishes rose out of the sink, hung in the air, and then flew hard into the wall, smashing on impact. Laura screamed. A wooden block that held their knives slid across the counter and flew past Jerry's shoulder. The couple retreated to the doorway and watched, but nothing else moved. Eventually, they went back in. The house stayed quiet, and Jerry went outside to get the last bit of shopping from their car. While he was gone, Laura saw the kitchen table rise slowly, tip and flip, landing upside down on the chairs and throwing food and bags across the floor. Behind her, the refrigerator lifted, turned a little, and sat back down, leaving scrape marks on the floor. When she stepped away from it, a small television in the kitchen toppled forward, landing on her foot. Jerry came back to the sound of her shouting. He hauled the set off her foot and bandaged it as best he could. They sat and waited. They talked about the possibility of some kind of earth movement, an earthquake, something shifting under the foundations. The problem is, none of it felt random. The table had not just fallen, it had turned itself upside down. The refrigerator had not rattled, it had glided. The block of knives had not simply tipped, it had been launched. Later that night, when the house was calmer, Jerry went back through the kitchen to switch off the light. As he stood there, he felt very strongly that someone else was in the room with him. His eyes tracked that feeling, and suddenly the table moved just slightly, as if somebody had bumped into it. He switched off the light and went back to the living room. Later that evening, Jerry was in the bathroom shaving when Marcia screamed. He ran to her room. The television had fallen, again, face down on the bed, this time on her ankle. It looked like the family would get little sleep tonight. They moved back into the living room, turned on the main television, and stayed there together. At some point, Marcia went to the bathroom. A moment later, another scream. The shower curtain rail was on the floor. The metal rod and rings were scattered around the tub. It had fallen very close to where she had been standing. Sunday, the 24th. Jerry woke up to find the kitchen wrecked again. The table was over. The refrigerator had been dragged so it blocked the back door. He had heard nothing during the night. He went to the bedroom to talk to Laura. As they stood there, a crucifix and a picture of Jesus tore themselves from the wall and dropped at their feet. Then there was another heavy crash from Marcia's room. They ran in. A large piece of furniture had fallen onto her bed, inches from where she was laying. They followed the sounds back to the living room. 3 recliner chairs were moving, sliding around the floor, rocking, some lifting for a moment, as if something was pushing them from underneath. The television was on, but not tuned to any channel, just static. Over that hiss, they could hear what sounded like a distorted doorbell ringing again and again. In the bright daylight, with all three of them standing in the middle of it, the word haunting became harder to brush away. Laura phoned their friends, the Hoffmans, sobbing that something was terribly wrong with the house. Jerry took her and Marcia out onto the front porch to wait. As they stood there, they saw their neighbour, Janet Holdsworth, walking her dog. Before they could call out, Laura screamed. The green sofa on the patio was in the air. It hung there for a moment, a few inches above the concrete, then dropped. Janet saw it. Jerry shouted for her to get her father. Officer John Holdsworth arrived and told the family to wait outside while he went in. The moment he walked through the front door, he saw the mess. Furniture over, ornaments broken, dishes smashed. He came back out and returned back inside with Jerry. As they stood there talking, the television changed position behind them. It had been at one angle, now it sat at another. Holdsworth checked for wires, for anything that might explain it. He turned away. The set moved back by itself. In the kitchen, the refrigerator jerked sideways and hit him in the arm. He told Jerry to call the police. The first patrol car to arrive carried officers Carl Leonzi and Joe Tomac. They came in around 10 in the morning. They stepped into a house that looked like it had already been burgled, a family who looked as though they had been awake for days. Their first assumption was that they were dealing with a domestic incident, or maybe a break-in. Then Joe picked up a fallen television and stood it upright. Less than a minute later, it was face down on the floor again. He put it back on its stand and watched as it rose, hung in the air for a moment, and began to sway. He walked over, checked around it, found nothing, and watched it gently settle itself back to where it started. At that point, he radioed the station and asked for backup. More officers arrived. George Wilson, Leroy Lawson, others whose names show up in the reports and the later books. As they stood in the kitchen together, the refrigerator lifted silently about 6 inches, moved sideways, and sat down. No rattle, no clatter, just a heavy appliance sliding across the floor like a toy. To the Goodens, this was another wave of destruction. To the officers, something else stood out. Marcia did not seem particularly upset. She did not look excited either. She just seemed strangely flat, as if she had checked out. Joe radioed for an ambulance for Laura's foot and for a fire crew to check the building. Assistant Fire Chief Paul McKenna came with several crews. They checked the basement, they checked joists, the chimney, they checked gas lines. They even went to the nearby St. Vincent's Hospital construction site to see whether heavy equipment could be shaking the ground. They came up with nothing that matched what they were seeing. Inside the house, the television toppled again. The plastic funeral flowers in the kitchen vase shifted and turned as if somebody had brushed past them. Those were the same flowers that had rested on Jerry Jr.'s coffin 7 years earlier. A powerful sulphur smell drifted through the house, sharp and rotten. Outside, the sight of fire engines, ambulances and police cars parked all along a quiet street drew people out of their homes. Neighbours stood on porches. Curious drivers slowed down. Word started to spread. There is something happening at the Gooden house. Deputy Fire Chief Frederick Zvierlein rang the department chaplain Father Doyle and told him as calmly as he could that they had a situation which was either paranormal or a practical joke on an amazing scale. He felt the need to reassure the priest that he had not been drinking. Inside, Marcia sat on one of the recliners. The chair snapped between upright and reclined so violently that it shook her like an amusement ride until she climbed out. Laura cried out that something evil was trying to hurt them. When Father Doyle arrived, he dropped into one of those chairs and tried to push it back without touching the lever. He could not make a budge. He said that as soon as he stepped through the front door, he felt there was something heavy and hostile in the air. He blessed the rooms, sprinkling holy water. Several witnesses said that they saw the spray drift sideways rather than falling the way it should. He phoned another priest who had experience with such cases and asked him to come. By now, an ambulance had arrived to take Laura to hospital. Police officers who had seen furniture move on its own started to share stories of hearing the family cat talking in human words. At that point, several men simply walked out and refused to go back in. They preferred paperwork to something that messed with the rules of how the world is meant to work. Not everyone reacted that way. Some of the officers stayed and kept watch with Marcia. They felt sorry for her. They joked with her, taught her tricks, tried to keep the mood light. One of them got her to hold the cat and pretend in a silly voice that he was speaking and giving messages. It was an innocent enough game. When you put it alongside later claims of a talking cat, it becomes another thing to wonder about. While all this was going on, another piece was slotting into place. The neighbour, Mary Pascarella, had a keen interest in the paranormal. She had read about poltergeists. She tried a few simple tests with Marcia to see whether she might be unconsciously causing some of the activity. Nothing clear came of it. So she went home and picked up the phone. She called a couple whose lecture she had recently attended, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine turned up later that day with a priest they often worked with, Father William Sherbano, and a young seminary student named Paul Eno. By this time the house was crowded. On top of the family there were police, firemen, neighbours, a catechism teacher, and now a team of paranormal investigators. Outside, the growing interest meant more people gathering on the pavement. Marcia's religious education teacher, Barbara Carter, had also arrived to look after her and see whether she could help. Jerry, who had never heard of the Warrens before, told them what had been going on. Ed told Paul to stay close to Marcia. In his view, children were either the focus of poltergeist activity or the ones manufacturing it. Either way, you kept an eye on them. Paul found her in the basement with two officers who were gently trying to persuade her to admit that she was responsible. She denied it and cried. Upstairs, more objects moved. Knocks sounded on the front door when no one was there. The banging in the walls started again. Marcia sat in the recliner where everyone could see her. The chair rose up towards the ceiling and then slammed back to the floor, pulling her with it. It took two men to lift it back. Inspectors had already been through the house checking structure, wiring and plumbing. They found nothing that could explain any of this. One electrical worker and one plumber both saw the refrigerator slide across the kitchen floor while they were there. A police officer told them to leave and to say nothing. By late afternoon, most officers began to leave. They had reached the point where there was nothing more they could do except watch things fall over. Before he left, Officer Tomac slipped into Marcia's room and tried a quiet experiment. He stood in the doorway and taught one simple sentence. If you can hear me, move something now. According to him, several objects in the room began to shake. He did not write that observation in any official report. He talked about it decades later, when he no longer needed to worry about promotion boards. While all this was happening, Ed Warren was working another angle. He was on the phone ringing newsrooms, telling them a remarkable story was unfolding on a small street in Bridgeport, and that they might want to send a camera crew. By 4 that afternoon, television vans were parked up outside the Gooden house. Reporters set up tripods across the road. As the first local segments went out, more people turned up. Stories spread through the crowd like smoke. People talked about a little girl being flung in the air, furniture flying, a cat reciting Christmas songs. Some onlookers claimed to see chairs moving through the windows. Others said that the ceramic swans in the Goodens' small garden had turned their head or spoken. The Warrens left for a while that evening, but the damage or the publicity, depending on your view, was done. Later that night, Fire Chief McKenna came back with his 3 stepsons. They did not believe him. They left the house pale. They had witnessed objects move and the television slide and fall. At Ed's request, the Goodens left fallen items where they'd landed. The next day, media interest grew. The Goodens let a few reporters in until one of them saw an old prayer book and decided it was some kind of occult text. Within hours, articles were claiming that Marcia was involved in dark rituals. Inside the house, anyone paying attention would have noticed something else. At times, Marcia seemed to be copying events. She would sit in the recliner and deliberately work the handle, pushing herself back and forwards in front of the adults, almost like she was trying to show them the scene they had missed. Laura, now back from the hospital, scolded her and told her to stop. Down in the basement, Father Bill and the Warrens spoke quietly with her, trying to keep her grounded. The basement lights went out. Marcia went upstairs and fiddled with the switch until it came back on. When she returned and they resumed talking, a metal rod shot out from under a pile of tools and missed Father Bill by inches. He said it moved like a missile. At some point that day, Marcia went upstairs and Ed claimed he heard the cat say the words, "Jingle bells." Other people, including officers and neighbours, later claimed to have heard the cat speak. Depending on who you listen to, this was either a genuine phenomenon or the memory of a girl holding her pet and doing a silly voice, becoming more dramatic as it was retold. Lorraine went into the kitchen and told Jerry that she felt sick in certain rooms. Soon after, a burn mark appeared on her wrist and began to blister. Ed, according to some accounts, told her to leave the house, worried about spontaneous combustion. There is no medical report of that burn, but the Goodens remembered seeing it. That night they all watched the 11 o'clock news together, seeing their own house up on the screen. The yellow mist. On the Monday, police had started checking number plates to make sure that anyone driving onto the street actually lived there. The crowds were that large. Father Bill got a call from Laura. She said the night had been awful. The activity had not let up. The Warrens pushed for permission to carry out an exorcism. The church dragged its feet. Some bishops were not convinced by the case. Others were unwilling to be seen to endorse something that had already turned into a media circus. During the day, the house was slightly calmer. The crowd, however, was not. People shouted at the Goodens to come out. Some called them liars to their faces. A reporter from the Bridgeport Post arrived. He was allowed inside and saw the dish rack on the counter slide towards the family and then fling itself off. Later that afternoon, something happened that would later become one of the most disputed parts of the case. Jerry, Laura, Marcia and Paul Eno sat in the living room playing Monopoly, just trying to pass the time and feel normal. Eno has written about this in detail. He says a smell began to drift from the kitchen, not just sulphur, but something like ozone, a sharp metallic scent. Jerry stood up, went into the kitchen and began to chant in Latin, phrases that he had not used since serving as an altar boy 40 years earlier. A pale cloud started to form in the doorway. It thickened into something like a yellow mist and then stretched into 4 distinct columns, each about the size of a small person. They had rounded tops and no faces. Laura started to cry. Marcia clung to Paul. As one of the shapes moved close to him, Paul says he reached out and felt something like a thin, bony structure, like the wing of a bird under a thin sheet. Even though the figure looked transparent, he was convinced that these were not visions but some kind of physical presence that barely occupied this world. Then one of these shapes seemed to lift Marcia and throw her, sending her crashing across the room. He shouted at them to get out and they ran, straight into the rain and to the stunned faces of the crowd outside. That night, down in the basement, Father Bill and the Warrens said they saw a dark figure in the shadows, about the height of a person, with what looked like small horn stubs on its head. They did not share that detail with the family. Later, 2 reporters from a local radio station came to the house expecting to cover a silly story. They left looking like they had seen something they could not explain. They watched a table fall over, the flowers move, the recliner snap back hard enough to slam into the wall with Marcia in it. And they both said later that the force involved seemed beyond what a 10-year-old could do. They also noticed that at times she seemed oddly calm once the shock wore off. When Jerry eventually told Marcia to go to bed, she stood up and flew backwards as if somebody had pushed her, hitting the wall. One of the reporters said he heard the cat say the word help. By the time they left, just after 1 a.m, the story had changed from a bit of fun to something that kept them awake at night. Outside the house, Father Bill offered blessings to the officers manning the barricades, in case anything followed them home, all except one, Officer Frank Del Toro. He remained convinced that the whole thing was nonsense. He was also one of the only men who never directly saw an object move. Back at the headquarters, Superintendent Joseph Walsh had reached his limit. Lindley Street had become a public order problem, a black eye for the department, and a drain on resources. He wanted it over. The following night, Officer Mike Costello was on crowd control when Jerry came to him almost in tears. The living room was destroyed again, glass everywhere. Costello went inside. He saw Marcia in the recliner. This time she was clearly moving the chair herself, working the handle with her hand and rocking back and forth. Laura told her sharply to stop messing. Later there was a crash in the bathroom while Laura was in there. More objects thrown, more things broken. 2 more officers arrived, including Del Toro. As they stood in the living room talking, Costello watched Marcia nudge the television with her foot. It slid a little and bumped into Jerry's leg. Del Toro said later that he took Marcia aside and had a gentle conversation with her. She was upset. She admitted to pushing the television at times, pretending the cat could talk, and opening the refrigerator door herself on one occasion. She said her parents had not told her to do any of it. When he asked why she had done those things, he said she told him, "I just wanted to see if the demon would do anything." She also said that she had seen Lorraine Warren holding her wrist under very hot water at the sink before the blister appeared. Those claims went back to the station almost immediately. Inspector Philip Clark came and spoke to a handful of the officers. After a very short discussion, the case was marked as cleared. The incidences on Lindley Street were publicly declared to be a hoax perpetrated by a lonely 10-year-old girl. Marcia was referred to a clinic for assessment. Doctors did not find any mental illness. The Goodens were devastated. They did not believe their daughter was capable of faking everything they had seen. They were also furious with the Warrens, especially when they realised just how many long-distance calls had been made to newsrooms from their phone. They cut contact with Ed and Lorraine Warren and later, through a lawyer, told them not to use their case in talks. Superintendent Walsh held a press conference. He told reporters there were no ghosts in Bridgeport. He said that even some of his own men had been taken in by the power of suggestion and that the Warrens should stay away. For most of the city, that was the end of it. For the Goodens, it was not. They still had a broken house, a traumatised daughter, and a reputation in ruins. They also said that the activity in the house did not stop. With the hoax label in place, the crowds thinned, but they did not vanish. The Goodens took Marcia to appointments while people shouted at her in the street. On Thanksgiving Day, they tried to have a normal day with family. When they returned home, furniture had moved again. Ornaments lay broken. They tried to tell themselves that perhaps people had broken in. It was easier than going back to the other possibility. That night, Jerry smelled smoke and could not find the source. He went outside and told the officer on duty. It turned out that a group of men had tried to set fire to the house with the family still inside. 2 men were arrested. They said they wanted to burn out the evil that had come into their neighbourhood. In December, new officers assigned to the area went into the house and saw objects move when Marcia was not present. On the 14th, after spending the night with relatives, the family returned and found the home trashed again. Jerry resorted to pouring cement into a bucket, putting the vase of the Christmas tree into it, and wiring heavy furniture to the walls so that at least some things could not fall. Father Doyle stayed in touch as much as he could, but by now the Goodens were living in a kind of siege. Then a new group entered the story. On the 16th of December, a researcher named Boyce Beatty contacted the Goodens. He was working with the Psychical Research Foundation in North Carolina and had experience with poltergeist cases. He offered to come and look, not as a priest or as a police officer, but as somebody who studied these things. On the 18th, he arrived at the house with Dr. Jerry Solfin and Keith Harari. Very quickly, they realised they were not going to be fighting the police for access to files. To their surprise, Inspector Philip Clark met with them and brought out a box of reports. In private, he made it clear that he was not satisfied with the outcome of hoax. He allowed Solfin to read internal statements and to sit down one-to-one with officers who had been inside the house. A lot of those officers were still angry. They had written exactly what they saw, signed their names to it, and then had been told by their own chief that they had been fooled by a child. Over the next few weeks, the three parapsychologists spent hours on Lindley Street. They saw the kitchen table flip. They heard the sound of heavy boots in the empty rooms. They watched objects fall or shift, sometimes after they had asked aloud for a sign. They ran whatever small experiments they could under the circumstances and tried to document every incident. Their notes, together with the police and fire reports, and later work of author William J. Hall in his book, The World's Most Haunted House, are a big part of why this case is so densely recorded compared with most hauntings. When their fieldwork was nearly finished, Beatty and Father Bill sat down with Jerry and Laura for a hard conversation. They told them, first of all, that they believed them. If they thought the whole thing had been a deliberate stunt, they said, they would not have spent so much time in that bungalow, and they would not have put their reputations on the line for it. But they also told them that, in their view, Marcia seemed to sit at the centre of whatever was happening. Not as a little girl quietly planting magnets or strings. They did not believe that she planned and staged every event. They pointed out, as several officers had, that there were times when things moved while she was nowhere near the room. What they meant was that she might be the focus of some kind of unconscious process, a build-up of stress, grief and frustration in a very sensitive child inside a very tense home, maybe finding an outlet in a way none of them understood. That is the idea that parapsychologists sometimes call recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. It is controversial even inside that field, but it is one of the main theories in this case. They also told the couple that they needed help. In their view, the mental toll of what they had witnessed and everything that had happened had left a scar. Jerry and Laura said that once the investigation was over, they wanted to get away from Lindley Street completely. Father Bill warned them that if something was attached to them, or to Marcia, rather than to the bricks and plaster, it might not stay behind. The Goodens did not make money from the Lindley Street haunting. They lost money. Furniture, televisions, broken plates, damage to the building. Later they spent more on legal advice, not to sign book deals, but to try and repair the damage done to Marcia's name. They did agree to one radio interview with a local station where Jerry said clearly that he did not believe his daughter had faked everything. When a lawyer suggested that they could earn something by selling their story, they said no. Through the same lawyer, they also told the Warrens not to use their case in talks. And they sent Ed a bill for the calls that had gone out from their phone to news desks around the country. They tried to sell the house. No one wanted to buy the address that had been on national television. They never managed to move during their lifetimes. Reports from the middle of the 1970s talk about the property sitting on the market and neighbours insisting there was nothing wrong with the building itself. Marcia grew into her teens and eventually left. She wanted to go back to Canada to look for her birth family. She later changed the spelling of her name to Marcia, some believe, and kept quiet about her childhood. If anyone asked her about Lindley Street, she would just say she did not know what they meant. Laura died in a road accident in the early 1990s, and Jerry died a few years later of natural causes. For a long time, no one knew what happened to Marcia. Then obituaries and public records surfaced for a woman of that name born in Canada who had lived for a time in Ohio and died in 2015. Researchers, including William Hall, are convinced that this was the same girl. The house at 966 Lindley Street still stands. Other families have lived there since. Just another small home in a quiet American city. As far as anyone knows, the current owners have no interest in the story, and they understandably do not want ghost hunters on their lawn. Thank you for listening to this episode of Scary. Make sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience that you'd like me to narrate on the show, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and it just might get made into a future episode. Thank you for listening, and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here, wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day. Yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Most people overpay for car insurance, not because they're careless, but because switching feels like too much hassle. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/ACAST today.
Most security systems react after a break-in begins. That's too late. SimpliSafe is different. It's proactive. ActiveGuard Outdoor Protection uses AI-powered cameras to spot suspicious activity before criminals get inside. Live monitoring agents can see, speak to, and scare off intruders in real time, quickly calling police if needed. To get 60% off your new system, go to simplisafe.com/podcast. That's simplisafe.com/podcast for 60% off. There's no safe like SimpliSafe.
A lot of supplement brands chase trends, but if you're serious about your health, we know research-backed science is what actually moves the needle. Momentous works with the best brains in human science to create every formula, and every batch is made of pure ingredients, tested for safety, and does not contain fillers. So you get the best long-term results possible. Creatine isn't just for muscle gains, it's essential daily fuel for your brain, body, and long-term performance. Momentous CreaPure Creatine is backed by leading performance experts like Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Stacy Sims. Sourced exclusively in Germany, CreaPure sets the gold standard for creatine, delivering the purest form, creatine monohydrate, that's rigorously washed and never cut with fillers. With over 2,000 5-star reviews, over 112,000 customers have seen the results firsthand. With Momentous, the fundamentals are done right. Right now, Momentous is offering our listeners up to 35% off your first subscription order with promo code ACAST. Go to livemomentous.com and use promo code ACAST for up to 35% off your first subscription order. That's livemomentous.com, promo code ACAST.
If you're a custodial supervisor at a local high school, you know that cleanliness is key, and that the best place to get cleaning supplies is from Grainger. Grainger helps you stay fully stocked on the products you trust, from paper towels and disinfectants to floor scrubbers. Plus, you can rely on Grainger for easy reordering, so you never run out of what you need. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you're a smoker or vapor ready to make a change, you really only need one good reason. But with Zyn nicotine pouches, you'll discover many good reasons. Zyn is America's #1 nicotine pouch brand. Plus, Zyn offers a robust rewards program. There are lots of options when it comes to nicotine satisfaction, but there's only one Zyn. Check out zyn.com/find to find Zyn at a store near you. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.